Well, here we go with a brand new edition of Faith and Sport on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network, 1270 AM Charlotte. Also streaming at carolinacatholicradio.org and on the Carolina Catholic Radio app. We're also broadcasting across the Radio Maria Radio Network. So welcome to all of our Radio Maria fans tuning in today for Faith and Sport. I'm Chris, the producer of the show, and as always, joining us live in the studio, the host of Faith and Sport, Dr. John Acquaviva.
Welcome to the show, however, wherever, and whenever you're listening to us. This is Faith and Sport. I'm Dr. John Acquaviva. This show is for people who play sports, people who watch people who play sports, people who coach sports, people who are administrators for sports. If you're involved in sport and you want to bring up the character, ethics, and morality of those around you, this is the show. In fact, from what I understand, Carlos and Chris, I think we're the only ones on any airwave doing this. I think this is a terrific opportunity for all of us. So thank you for joining us today, folks. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to discuss all things sports, including our hit or miss with Carlos Herrera, who's on the line. He's going to join us in 2 minutes. We're going to do weekend headlines. Our guest today in the second half of the show is Ann Stricherz, a teacher and coach from St. Francis High School in San Francisco. She's also the author of Pray and Practice with Purpose. She's a great guest. She's a friend of the show. She's been on the show a few times, but not in a while, and we want to know what's on Ann Stricherz's mind today. We're going to do the quick Q&A with Dr. A, and we're going to end it all up with Chris's favorite segment, our PGA Golfer of the Week.
Man, why can't it be the MLB Player of the Week?
Because
that'd be more exciting.
Because it's the PGA Golfer of the Week. Listen, Carlos Herrera is going to join us in a second. Boy, we were talking off air about things on our mind, our hit and miss, and so forth. We got a couple really good things to talk about, so stay tuned for that, folks.
Yeah, I've got a hit for Carlos.
Oh, you do? I know you do. Yeah, because it's about your Atlanta Braves over at Sport National. I know.
That's right.
They're defenseless now. They're defenseless.
Yeah.
They don't have Strasburg's. He's hurt. Anthony Rendon, their great hitter, he's gone. They're defenseless. It's like a toothless tiger playing your Atlanta Braves, brother.
That's right. I just want to rub that in as much as I can on Carlos. While we've got him here on the show today.
Carlos is a fair weather friend, I think, as much as anybody, in that he was all over their bandwagon a couple years ago when they were winning. Right now, when they're in the middle of the pack, he's like, Washington who?
The who? What?
Anyway, I'm relying on Carlos. Yeah, you have to help remind me. I need for him. He's such a powerful character, Carlos, in Washington, D.C. I want to take my son to his first major league game, and I'm relying on Carlos to remind me to ask him about pulling some strings for him to get a couple tickets. But you know what I understand is, like the Nats and almost everybody else, the ticket prices are really high.
Wow.
Yeah, because of they only have limited seating, and those owners want to make up that money. So don't let me forget to ask our buddy Carlos about that. But he's so powerful, I have a feeling he's going to be able to get me 4 tickets. I'm going to ask for 2, and he's going to give me 4.
Yeah, I was thinking we ought to just make it a whole trip for all of us and wait till football season and go see a Washington football game.
I didn't say anything about you, brother. This is just about me and my son, Luke, trying to. I just want to, get him to fully embrace the sport of baseball. Listen, folks, before I bring Carlos on, I want to talk to you about who is supporting our show. That is Carolina Crawl Space Pros. Folks, do you know what the most expensive home improvement is? It's the one you do twice. Make sure you hire a company that does it right the first time and stands behind their work. And the guys that stand behind their work are the guys at Carolina Crawl Space Pros. Owner Jeff Wolf and Company. In fact, he will give you $250 off. If you go to our website and to my page on Carolina Catholic Radio, you'll see some information on how to do that. Contact Carolina Crawl Space Pros today. Thank you, Jeff Wolf, and you guys at Carolina Crawl Space Pros for supporting this show. Well, I've mentioned him a few times. It's about time we had a conversation with him. He is Carlos Herrera. He is a former youth director, youth minister in the D.C. area, and a certified soccer coach. Carlos Herrera, welcome to the show, buddy.
Lolitos! Great to be back once again, Dr. Acquaviva.
This is fantastic. Lolitos, I said to you before we came on, I said, hey, I want to talk about MLS. And Carlos said, I'm not ready to talk about that. So, in fact, either am I. But here's one of the reasons I want to talk about this in one of your upcoming segments, Carlos, is that they are no longer the new Major League Soccer. They're no longer the new Major League team or organization. They've been around for more than a decade. In fact, Carlos, is it safe to say that they've been in, for instance, D.C. for 15 years now, maybe longer.
I believe that's correct.
That's amazing. So the next time you and I both promised that we'd do a little bit of homework. And one of the reasons I want to talk about this, Carlos, is guess who's getting a team this year? Carolina.
I was going to say Carolina?
Yeah. In fact, get this, Carlos. They are going to be playing. Their home field is in Matthews, North Carolina.
Oh.
Who between the two of us lives in Matthews, North Carolina? That would be
you and your family.
Me and my family. In fact, they're going to be right down the street. So, boy, I'm going to talk about getting tickets. I want to, Carlos, the next time you come, I got to take you to that complex. It is outstanding. Anyway, that's what the new.
It's beautiful. It's a lot of fun. Those games.
It is. In fact, the time you and I, talk about getting tickets. When we went to go see, you took me because remember, a mutual friend of ours, his roommate played for the DC United. And he got us tickets, remember? And I remember I was so impressed, not just with how many people were there, but, boy, they were as lively as any 75, 80,000, 80,000 crowd that I've ever been to. Remember how exciting that was? Of course, you've been in a lot of games since then. I thought it was terrific.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And one of the things to compare it with, I would think, is minor league baseball. The stadium's smaller. There's a lot more fun. So there's a more relaxed environment. It's kind of a fun environment when you take your family, especially the teams that cater to families.
Yeah.
It's fun, but this is a bigger stadium, and it's not the minor league team.
Yeah. Folks, you're listening to Faith in Sport, so thank you for joining us today here on Carolina Catholic Radio. It's also a co-production of Radio Maria. Faith in Sport, where we apply our faith to all aspects of sport, so thank you for joining us today. By the way, if you have a question, if you have a comment, there's a bunch of ways you can get in touch with me through carolinacatholicradio.org, or Carlos and I each have our own way. You can contact us through John at faithandsportradio.com or Carlos at faithandsportradio.com. We would love to hear from you folks for several reasons. What you think about the show, what you would like us to talk about on upcoming shows, or if there's somebody in your community or somebody that you know of that would be a great guest for this show, let me know about them. Carlos, each and every time you're on the show, each and every week, we do what's called the hit or miss, something that's good or positive in the world of sport. And the irony is here, it wasn't what I picked to be my hit or miss, but it was yours. But I put it on my sheet of paper to talk about. So what is your hit or miss for the week? And let's chat about it.
So I'm going to tie it in. I understand that Chris was talking some, shall we say it, trash about the Braves and the Nationals having gotten beaten, and he was going to take.
Yeah, you mean that three-game sweep?
Hit me with it. So I was thinking of challenging Chris to play a little hockey with me, a little roller hockey or some ice hockey with me, and see if
and see how it turns out.
Yeah, to do that.
I know.
Which is related to my hit or miss.
That's right. Chris, by the way, before you take on that that challenge, Carlos and I, a couple years ago, this is actually more than 10 years ago, and we were playing soccer on a regular basis in D.C., and I work out a lot more than Carlos does. I can, lift, bench press and so forth a lot more than him. But my gosh, on the soccer field, I felt like a flea on the back of a rhinoceros when I was trying to get the ball from him. He is so strong. He's so much bigger and stronger than me. So before you agree to play roller hockey with the brother, it's athlete beware there. Okay, Carlos, I cut you off, brother. You're hit or miss.
I think it's something like dance like a rhinoceros, dance like a bee, hit like a rhinoceros, something like that.
I think we're at the
anyway,
end of that
my
part.
hit or miss.
Yeah,
my
let's
hit or
hear it.
miss is definitely about and related to the sport of hockey.
Yeah.
And really, it's I think it's a miss. And I'm hard pressed to say this because I enjoy the game of hockey. I've played rugby. I've played roller hockey in a contact-less league. And nonetheless, you're going to have contact, just like in soccer. Soccer is not a contact sport technically, but there's a tremendous amount of contact that occurs in the rate of play and in the span of a game. So in hockey, I think most people are familiar with that there is a role or has been a role in fighting in hockey. And originally this was created or allowed to happen because teams, in order to level the playing field, if you're playing a very talented, fast, and maybe even small team, and you had a bunch of big guys, it was hard for these sort of lumbering hockey players to kind of keep up with the fast team. So they would use their body and their physicality to kind of slow them up. That's, to this day, that's still how it works. And vice versa. If you were a fast team, you would want to have somebody that actually could help counter some of that physicality. So invariably, over time, or with the game, what grew into the game was that the people would get into fights, particularly when, if you had a strong lumbering guy, or even somebody that they would call, and this used to be a particular role, is somebody called the enforcer, who would basically go after somebody. So what typically would happen is somebody like an enforcer who liked to fight, was good at fighting, would train in boxing during the year in addition to hockey. Sometimes they would go after the opposing team's best player, because if you got him out of the game with some sort of injury, right, then your team had a better shot. So the other team had to counteract it. So this whole environment of fighting is something that is accepted in hockey, and as every game probably has one or two fights. And this particular game was against the Capitals, who I am a very big fan of and follow them closely. Tom Wilson is a Capital player who is actually rather talented in hockey. He's not one of the superstars, but he's a very solid player. He plays on the top line with Ovechkin. And he, for his size, is a guy who's willing to get in a fight. And he'll protect his players, and he'll retaliate if somebody hits their guys. So anyway, there's a big melee in a game with the Rangers on May 3rd, of which he was really accused of being overly aggressive and insulting of the game and not being fair. And I hadn't seen this sort of fight. But my wife, who happens to be a Tom Wilson fan and a Capitals fan, she rarely calls me and rarely looks at footage, but said, "Did you see the fight with Tom Wilson and the Rangers that everybody's been talking about?" I said, "No, I hadn't." She goes, "Well, I looked at it, and it didn't seem any different than a normal fight in a hockey game." And I said, "That's interesting, because there's been a lot of talk about it." He got a $5,000 fine. The Rangers felt he should have gotten suspended from the league and play. And the Rangers then complained publicly, saying that the head of player safety should have been removed for not doing more than giving Tom Wilson a $5,000 fine. And then the league ended up giving the Rangers, for that little public comment, a $250,000 fine. So the next game, and I think before even the puck dropped, or as the puck dropped, the Rangers basically said, "We're coming after you," to the Capitals. And I think all 5 players on the ice all locked up into a fight right as soon as the puck dropped.
They engaged in some manner. There was 3 fights simultaneously, and the other 2 basically grabbed their opponent. And I think there was 6 fights altogether. But folks, just to paint that picture, as you know, the teams come, there's 2 guys that come to the circle, 1 from each team, and then the only other guy that's in that vicinity is the referee, and he has the puck, and he drops the puck right between their 2 sticks, which are on the ice right at midpoint, and then they fight for the puck. But this was weird. It was really strange, and this isn't the first time, but it's so kind of outrageous. You can go to, YouTube, for instance, and find just the handful of times in which this has happened. They did not care about where that puck landed. The only reason a stick might have hit the puck is because when they dropped it to engage in a fight, their stick accidentally may have hit the puck. Carlos, I thought that literally, when that happens, when I see that, I just go, oh my gosh, every time you think we're in a more civilized society, you see that. And I know this is even a form of exaggeration, or this is hyperbole maybe at its best. But Carlos, the very first thing I thought about when I saw that was, oh my gosh, we're no better than we were. They look like Neanderthals when they do that.
Yeah, and it was in that particular game, for the listeners, that game where all 5 players at the drop of the puck happened was as a result of the game before that, where Tom Wilson essentially got off scot-free with a $5,000 fine. So the Rangers were very angry at the NHL and the Capitals, and I think there were 6 fights alone in that following game. And everybody knew, right? Like they're all telegraphing, telling, I'm going to take you out, and they were all ready to fight. And it really is. If you were, a visitor and you happen to turn on the TV and you wanted to watch a hockey game and you've never seen one before and you turn it on, you would think that this game was a boxing match.
That's right.
And, to me, I enjoy hockey, love hockey, and, I've played rugby, and there's a lot of violence, if you will, from just the collisions, but it's a very clean sport in of itself. But when you put men or even women together and you're playing a very intense sport, and I think particularly men, I think, tempers flare, and I've seen fights in rugby, I've seen fights in soccer, I've seen fights in hockey.
In every
hockey
sport, yeah.
It's accepted. But I have a problem with it. I have a moral problem with it. I think it's just, I understand why it's in hockey, but I don't understand why the league actually accepts it. And I don't want to say promotes it because I don't think they do, but I think they, wink, wink. They say it's this is what the sport, part of the sport, and to be true hockey fans, has to be in there. I just think it's not a good example for kids. Like, I think if I wanted my son to watch a hockey game as a youngster and 6 fights break out, I would say, we have to turn it off because this is not really how this game should be played.
That's right. Folks, you're listening to Faith in Sport. I'm Dr. John Acquaviva. I teach exercise science at a local university here, Wingate University, just east of Charlotte, where we do the show. Being joined by Carlos Herrera. We're doing our hit or miss of the week. Faith in Sport, where we look at sport through a Catholic lens. Thank you very much for joining us today, everybody from Carolina Catholic Radio and Radio Maria. Carlos, one of the things I thought of that I did not actually think of in our pre-show conversation was, there's an old saying, in fact, I think, at least to a degree, that Pius the Sixth was given, not Pius the Sixth, but one of our popes in the past was given credit for saying, and that is, if you want peace, fight for justice. And it makes sense that the reason that the Rangers were so mad was because whether you agree or disagree as a Caps fan or as a fan in general, they felt they were slighted, and he only got, and correct me on this, he was only fined $5,000. Which you and I both know in the world of professional sport, geez, if you spit on the sidewalk in some leagues, you can get fined as little as $5,000. That sounds like the minimum fine. And I think they felt there was lack of justice. So just like anything, they want to take it into their own hands. But your point is still the NHL could and should step in, because you made a great point. If you're watching with your son, Max, which probably in the next 2 years, he'll probably start getting interested in sport. Luke is 9 right now, my son, and it was really around the age of 6 or 7 that he had started to get a genuine interest in sport. So with your son, Max, it's maybe a couple years away, but you made a great point, brother, in that if you're watching a Caps hockey game, if you guys are there especially, you're probably going to feel somewhat embarrassed if a fight breaks out, especially if a series of fights break out.
Yeah, and it's like the Coliseum. I think, when you're in the stadium and they start fighting, right? Like, it's just, to me, and I feel very strongly about this. When you get a lot of people, and it's like they check their sensibilities, their discipline, and this is a sporting event against guys that, they're same as us, but they're in a different town. But sometimes after a fight, let's say one of the opposing players gets hurt. I mean, I've seen the stadium erupt and chant and boo the other team. And it's
pounding on the glass,
too. Just or fair or Christian about that kind of behavior. And to me, it's embarrassing, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah.
I love contact. Like, I don't shy away from it. I enjoy it. But I also think that it shouldn't be celebrated, and it certainly shouldn't be encouraged.
Yeah, the fighting. So I'm going to leave you with this question before we land the plane on your miss of the week. Carlos, if the NHL could, would they snap their finger? If they could snap their fingers and put an end to all fighting, would they do it, or do they, or as you mentioned, it's kind of a wink thing, and they're like, we don't necessarily encourage it, but there's a famous saying that there's affirmation through faint damnation. In other words, if you don't really denounce it, if you don't really say or set expectations, then ultimately you're giving a nod to this. Do you think the NHL ultimately welcomes it?
Oh, I think the NHL condones it. And I do think in this sort of age of becoming far more, having a lower tolerance for this sort of behavior, and I think the NHL should be getting pressure from the outside, and they may have to do something because I think it doesn't look good for the sport. But they definitely have a wink and a nod and accept it. I wonder how that would play out in terms of teams and building teams and defending themselves, because that role is still part of the game.
Yeah.
But I think there has to be a way that you can stop it sooner. And usually in hockey, if you watch hockey, for those that don't know, you can fight with an opposing player, right, as long as you want. But the moment either one of you falls to the ground, then the referees jump. And that's probably for the safety of the referees.
It is, yeah.
Swinging punches. But the moment one player goes down, I think it's viewed as the other one is now more vulnerable, and two refs will jump in to separate the bodies. And it's almost like the players know and they stop fighting. But I think that should stop. And there's got to be a way to stop it.
Yeah. Well, the only way is through fines, right? You take away people's money. This is their livelihood. I just don't see it happening soon. And part of it is, literally, if you look at the four major sports, right, football, basketball, baseball, and hockey, they're way down there. And I think they're like, if we put an end to that, then what few intensely loyal fans we have will go down. I don't think they have much interest in increasing their fan base. I just don't think they want to lose it. And if they cut out fighting, they lose it. Folks, you're listening to Faith in Sport. Carlos Herrera and I are talking about our hit or miss of the week. Mine goes back about 10 days ago, and mine has to do with the NFL draft. And as everybody knows, just a little bit of background, the NFL draft takes place over a period of days, but the big thing is the first day where everybody gets one pick and every team gets several minutes to make their pick. And the interesting thing about this, I think, is that, in fact, it's almost, as a fan of football, for sure, especially of college football, I'm downright fascinated on how much time, effort, and money everybody spends on projecting who will be picked, where our team's going to pick, like local radio here, the Charlotte Panthers or the Carolina Panthers. They're like, if we take that lineman here, we can maybe trade up to get to the 7th pick. And there's all this talk, and it's dizzying, especially when there's major sports going on at the time. MLS is going on, hockey is going on, basketball is going on, baseball is going on, and they'll still spend all the 2-hour programs, 3-hour programs, just talking about who in the draft is eligible, who is going to be taken where, and so forth. But my miss goes to the guys on ESPN's First Take, hosts Max Kellerman and Stephen A. Smith. These guys are really well known. They're big, major talking heads. But the problem comes from them bringing out the race card when it came to a particular player. Justin Fields, quarterback for Ohio State University, was projected to go as low as, or high, I should say, as maybe the 2nd or 3rd pick. But the week of the draft, he started to drop in the projectors' minds. But the fact is, they have no idea. These prognosticators for ESPN and Yahoo Sports and so forth have no idea really what are in the minds of the GMs of these professional football teams. And then he makes the statement, I think Justin Fields is dropping and maybe even out of the top 10 because it's due to his skin color. And I just think, gosh, in this culture that we have, we're overly, right? This is sensationalized. This is talked about a great deal, and I'm really concerned about this issue in our culture, and as I think we all are. It's just that instilling the race card in things that where it seemingly doesn't exist is just confusing to me. And he's yelling fire, basically, that he's not going to get picked because of his race when there's not even any smoke in the room. And it's bothersome. And I think it's more than anything, it's confusing. And it's ultimately suggesting that there's collusion on the part of the owners and the GMs of these football teams. Now, to kind of provide evidence against the fact that there's race involved in this, of the top 10 players picked, by the way, he was picked 11th, Justin Fields. Of the top 10, 8 of the 10 were black. So all he was doing really was trading places probably with another black player. Actually, I stand corrected on that. Of those 8, 7 of the 8 were African-American. Another one, I think, was of Samoan descent. But this would suggest that there's collusion among the GMs, and it's just unfounded, I think, and it's just putting in and inserting issues where it's not really the case. I'm not articulating that real well, Carlos, but what's your thought on that?
My thought is that in this day and age right now, where we are particularly, I think that may have been the week that they had they were revealing the guilty verdict for the police officer
Derek
in Minnesota.
Chauvin, yeah.
Right. So I think it was around that time, and I think race right now is being inserted everywhere, right, in almost every conversation, right, as to whether something is just or not. And I think Max, I don't know Max. I don't watch his program, Max Kellerman. He's from the Bronx. He had a little hip-hop radio or music studio show with his brother Sam. I found that out on WikiLinks. He was talking about quarterbacks particularly, and he was talking about how there may be that black quarterbacks are viewed differently, right, than white quarterbacks. And I think that when you comes to looking at the draft, if you were somebody who wasn't aware of how the drafts are evaluated or players, you might be able to kind of, if you took his comment, you would think, well, maybe there's some rationale to it, but you really wouldn't understand how the draft and how players move up or down in the draft. That would be like saying any white player that moves up in the draft position than where they were suggested means that there's some sort of racism because he got picked higher because he was white. In the same vein, if he was black player and he went down in position from where they thought he would go, then you could easily say that's racist. And that has nothing to do many times with where a player moves or not. It has to do with what they think that player, his health, his character, his skill sets, and what he needs. And
that's right.
His comment was about quarterbacks, right, and about how black quarterbacks are maybe prejudiced in the NFL. And the irony of that is that in 2020, the top-paid quarterbacks in the NFL, the top 4, are all African-American. Patrick Mahomes, Dak Prescott, Deshaun Watson, and Russell Wilson. So in the NHL, or the NFL, the top 4 players are African-American. So I don't understand how you correlate that the NFL is racist or systematically racist. I think the NFL has suffered, like a lot of organizations, in their development of accepting African-American, black players, brown players, Samoan players, whatever, because of how this country has evolved. But that doesn't mean that today, in this particular draft, that he's at all right. And I think he's injecting that just to create viewers and controversy on the show.
No, that's well stated. And one great point you made was he did make it in literally within a few days of the Derek Chauvin case, and I think he was just hitting on a nerve in our public, and he just took his show to kind of bring attention to his show and his voice, and then the voice of what he probably thinks is many, but I think it was errant, and the evidence states against him. Because you mentioned not only are there, the top 10 picks, almost all of them were African American. The top 4 highest paid players are not only African American, they're quarterbacks, as Justin Fields is. All right, brother, listen, it's good stuff as always, Carlos. Thank you for joining us, buddy, and we'll see you here again on Faith in Sports soon.
Thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure. Look forward to next week or the week after that. Have a great show.
Thank you, buddy. Lolitos. There he goes. Carlos Herrera, a certified soccer coach in the D.C. area, former rugby player, and all-around good guy. And I consider him a dear friend. I thank him so much for joining us just about each and every week.
Yeah, but I'm going to have to decline his invitation for the hockey.
actually, you could always just you could always say something like, "I'll do it, brother. I'll do it," and then keep it going on the radio and so forth. And then when he comes down here, just goes, "Carlos, I was just kidding. I meant nothing by it." Well, folks, listen. Right after the break, we got Ann Stricherz, a high school teacher and coach. She's from the San Francisco area, and she is a sport and spirituality teacher, blogger, and podcaster. She's also an author. Stay tuned for that. But first, let's do weekend headlines. Chris, what's the music?
Spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of sport, the thrill of victory, and the agony of defeat. The human drama of athletic competition.
It's time for Weekend Headlines with Dr. John Acquaviva on Faith and Sport.
Here we go, folks. At the PGA, Irishman Rory McIlroy wins the Wells Fargo Championship for the third time, but his first win in 18 months on the tour. The most interesting story, however, was about the guy who finished ninth. More on that after the break. By the way, next up for the PGA is the Byron Nelson Classic. The Preakness Stakes is this weekend. Winner of the Kentucky Derby, Medina Spirit, may not only be out of the second leg of the Triple Crown in Baltimore this weekend, but may be out completely of racing due to an anti-inflammatory drug that was found in his system. By the way, there's a second test coming up to confirm this. Yeah, that would be a shame, but it certainly wouldn't be the first time a horse is disqualified from win. In fact, I wouldn't say it was just in the last few years that happened with another horse.
So the drug was given to the horse and not the rider? Or?
Yeah, the drug was given to a horse. But what I don't understand is, in fact, I have to read more about this, but it's an anti-inflammatory drug. It didn't necessarily help him perform better, but the fact is, if it's on the list of prohibited drugs, then they need to stay away from that. They went against the rules, right?
I never thought I'd see a day when a horse would take a performance-enhancing drug.
Well, that's it, right. They're the athlete in the race. It's not the jockey, so that would be surprising to me for sure. In the NHL, the playoffs begin this week with the Colorado Avalanche, the favorites to win the Stanley Cup. The amazing stat, the champs won't be crowned until the first week in July. It ends in July. Is that crazy?
Yeah.
So basically, you can have a hamburger at a July 4th picnic and then watch the NHL finals. It's going to be nuts. It's going so far into the summer. Major League Baseball, the league has already recorded its third and fourth no-hitters of this young season. The Orioles pitchers John Means and the Reds' Wayne Miley both reached this milestone in the past few days. That's 4 no-nos already. Means we're on pace for 21 for the 2021 season. So let me say that again. That's 4 no-nos already. Means that we're on pace for 21 no-hitters for the 2021 season. And anybody who's wondering this, the Bushy McBush 400 was last week in NASCAR.
That's right.
So we're going to talk about that for the next couple weeks because I just like saying the Bushy McBush 400. It just sounds great. So there you have it, folks. Sports news that may or may not change your life. Stick around, folks. We're going to have a break. We're going to come right back with more Faith in Sport.
You are listening to Faith and Sport on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network, 1270 AM Charlotte. Also streaming at carolinacatholicradio.org and on the Carolina Catholic Radio app. We're also broadcasting across Radio Maria, so all of our Radio Maria listeners, stay tuned for more Faith and Sport coming up right after the break. And also stay tuned on Carolina Catholic Radio. We've got more Faith and Sport coming your way. And if you can't get enough Faith and Sport, check out carolinacatholicradio.org for Faith and Sport on demand.
If you own or manage a business, you can underwrite some of our great local programs as a Carolina Catholic Radio business sponsor. For more information, contact us through our website at carolinacatholicradio.org.
This is Pam Cullen with your Carolina Catholic News Minute. Dr. Gracie Pozo Christie on Catholic Angelus Online wrote, "The inequalities of the Equality Act exposes the danger and hypocrisy of the anti-faith pro-LGBTQ legislation. The act comprises 31 pages of social engineering designed to transform countless aspects of American lives, including the most private and intimate. Its tremendous reach is made possible by its central conceit that the simple fact, understood by toddlers everywhere, that humans, like all mammals, come in two sexes, male and female, can be changed by government fiat. Instead of the clarity of sex, it proposes a jumble of jargon and wishful thinking about the power of self-definition and the exaltation of sexual proclivity over everything we used to hold sacred, like the innocence of children and the protection of women. For your Carolina Catholic News Minute, I'm Pam Cullen.
Teachers that care, professors that care about you. Just an awesome experience all around.
There's peace here. There's encouragement here.
Faculty, everybody that works here, they really set you up for success.
I don't think I have ever felt as loved and as supported and as encouraged as I have at the Abbey.
There's something here that's underlying and intrinsic. There's like a spirit of love and community. And I think the spirit is God's presence here.
Belmont Abbey College, a world away, but close to home. Visit us at belmontabbeycollege.edu.
Carolina Catholic Radio is here to encourage Catholics to learn, love, and live their faith. We're here to go into the breach when the active parishioner leaves the pew, when the inactive or fallen away Catholic needs reminding, and when a Christian is searching for answers only found in the church that Jesus Christ started with his apostles over 2,000 years ago. Please consider making a one-time donation or monthly pledge today. For more information, contact us through our website at carolinacatholicradio.org.
And we are back with more Faith in Sport on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network, 1270 AM Charlotte. Also streaming at carolinacatholicradio.org and on the Carolina Catholic Radio app. We're also broadcasting across the Radio Maria Network, so welcome back to all of our Radio Maria listeners. I'm Chris, the producer of the show, and once again, here he is, the host of Faith in Sport, the incomparable, whatever that means, Dr. John Acquaviva.
Folks, welcome back to the show. Carolina Catholic Radio, you're listening to a co-production of Radio Maria, as Chris mentioned. This is Faith in Sport, where we apply our faith to all aspects of sport. So whether you are an athlete, a parent of an athlete, a grandparent of an athlete, a referee, a contributor to sport in some way, if you like the conversation of sport to be weaved into character, morality, and ethics, this is the show for you. Thank you for joining us today. Listen, in 2 minutes, Ann Stricherz is going to join us. She is a friend of the show. She is a regular on the show. In fact, she has been gracious enough with her time over the years to join me on numerous occasions. She always has something good to say, always has something new to say. And the reason that she's one of my favorite guests is that she writes on, blogs on, teaches on, and has a podcast on sport and spirituality, the very thing that we do here on this show. She's also the author of Pray and Practice with Purpose, a playbook for the spiritual development of athletes. She's going to join us in about 2 minutes. Brother, did you hear what happened at this? You know, the Wells Fargo Championship took place here in Charlotte over the weekend. Did you hear what happened with Bryson DeChambeau?
I think so.
It was one of the craziest things. It's one of the most interesting things. I mentioned in the weekend headlines that the most interesting story, however, was about the guy who finished 9th, and it's Bryson DeChambeau. Mm-hmm. And he's a good upcoming golfer. He's one of the best golfers in the world for sure. He's an American young guy, real student of the game apparently. But on Friday, right, on Thursday and Friday, you qualify for the tournament. So if you have a score that's good enough, you can play on Saturday and Sunday, and you have a chance to win the championship and so forth. But it looked like he wasn't going to make the cut. And when it looked like he wasn't going to make the cut, he just jetted for back home in Dallas, right?
Wow.
And I think it was on the flight back to Dallas, he got a text message saying, brother, you made the cut. So this is Friday afternoon, right? Mm-hmm. So he's got to be back, and his tee time was like 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday.
Wow.
So he had to get his jet all ready. I think getting that thing all gassed up at the Lodal Exxon was probably, a big deal in itself. And then he flew back, and he had an hour to, I think at an hour and a half from the time he landed to get to the Wells Fargo course. Quail Hollow is what they call it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he had a half hour of practice, and then he had to jump on. Now, here's the thing. He finished 9th overall, so he really climbed up there, and he won $228,000. So
wow.
I know, isn't that great? It's a great little story.
Yeah.
But here's the question, Chris. Why on earth did he leave so quickly? Here's my thinking is when you travel like that every week, you're constantly away from home, is that you're just eager to get home, right? And whether you have a private jet or not, you're just like, it doesn't look like I'm going to make it. Mm-hmm. Chances of me making it are virtually none. And if I do, I'll just come back. And he's like, darn it, they called my bluff. I got to come back. Of course, he has the choice not to come back.
Yeah.
But he caught fire. In fact, he finished 9th overall and just a few shots off the lead. I thought that was a great story.
Yeah, and wouldn't it be nice to have your own plane and just call the pilot and say, hey, turn this thing around. We got to go back.
I know. It really does. Like $228,000 he won in one weekend, right? I mean, I go years and years at my job at Wingate University before I make that much money. And it just shows literally how professional athletes, they live in a different stratosphere when it comes to, he's on his own private jet? Mm-hmm. Jiminy crickets.
Well, I figure you probably make a lot more being a show host than a teacher.
I do. There's no question about it. I rake in the money here, brother, at Faith and Sport.
Your own syndicated sports show?
I know. Don't tell David Papandrea that. He's going to want some of this, what I'm getting over here. But
yeah, you won't take my cut.
I wouldn't dare do that. Listen, I talked about Ann Stricherz a couple times. She's on the line. Let's have a conversation with her right now. Ann, welcome back to the program.
Hi, John. Great to have a chance to talk to you. I'm here in Mountain View, California, and I'm thinking, they're talking about Bryson DeChambeau. He's like a local guy for us around here, and he's also 4 in the world, so he's not just an unimposing person on the tour. As a golfer myself, people have very strong opinions about Mr. DeChambeau.
Why?
So,
okay, so
fun to hear that.
He's a California guy.
He is. He's from Modesto. So, the way kind of golf works is Northern California Golf Association. You kind of have these groupings and ways by which you, compete in local and regional tournaments, and we really celebrate our local golfers. So
yeah.
We'll stake any claim. Like Colin Morikawa, played at Cal.
Yep.
There's something, but yeah, DeChambeau's from Modesto. He went to SMU, which is probably why he's in Dallas now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, he's super interesting. I shared a clip on, what he's known for is all his clubs are the same length.
Oh, is that right? And,
so,
and that's not common in the world of golf.
He's a physics guy.
Yeah, that's right. I think, they say he's like, he's equivalent to these statistician people that are involved in baseball.
Totally.
He just
sabermetrics.
He's just in every aspect of the sport, and he dissects it at every little turn. But he didn't dissect the chance for him making that cut, did he?
Yeah, so that was interesting because he played so poorly, but it just shows, like, in golf, so a 4-day tournament, the first 2 days, you go out in the morning on one day and the afternoon on the second day. And the weather conditions can be so totally different in the morning and the afternoon that it can affect your score. So he played terribly on Friday, so he just assumed. And I know, I'm in this golf world. So a friend of mine who's a caddy on the tour, like, for example, you have to sign up for, like, the next tournament you're going to play. And his golfer, who my friend's this caddy for this golfer, he didn't sign up for the tour for the next week, so they didn't have anywhere to go. And it sounds totally ridiculous to you and I that, like, he wouldn't have done something as simple as sign up, or that DeChambeau wouldn't even have looked at the cut. Like, it sounds, but I think, like you said, when you're in it, when you're traveling all the time, you make these errors, you make these mistakes. So I think it says something about him that he did decide to return and play. You're right, he didn't have to. So
yeah, I thought
good for him for taking 9.
Yeah, in fact, I did that on purpose. I wanted to talk about that in the first half of the show, and I said, I'm gonna talk about it just before Ann comes on because I'm sure she'll have a lot to say about that. But it was really neat story here because Wells Fargo is literally just a few minutes from where we do this show. Quail Hollow, I should say. Yeah, and so it was big in the sports world, but it was especially big here. And
I bet.
And it really wouldn't have made it as big as if he didn't do as well as he did. I mean, he really shot up there, and of course, ultimately, what it did was not that he didn't have the money to do it anyway, but it just made it justified that he won so much money, right? In the whole
sure.
thing.
Well, one of the things you have to talk about at some point in golf is just the sheer amount of money that is available in the game. I mean, we could talk about that with baseball, with football. I mean, the salaries, like it is almost painful, John, to hear you talk about, the work that we do as teachers, and then what these people make in a weekend. But they're flying their own jet. During COVID, the PGA ran. They were all tested regularly, so they flew chartered planes, but that the PGA had leased type of thing. So it's its own culture, and money is part of that culture. So
folks, we're being joined by Ann Stricherz here on Faith and Sport. You're listening to Carolina Catholic Radio, a co-production of Radio Maria. Ann is a teacher and coach at St. Francis High School in San Francisco, and the author of Pray and Practice with Purpose, a playbook for the spirituality development of athletes. Now, Ann, before we get further into our conversation, I've accomplished quite a bit on the field. I was a rugby player for a long time. I did some good stuff on the baseball field before and after college and so forth. But I'm telling you, one of the best feats I can take claim for is when I met my wife, and shortly thereafter I said, I'm going to marry this woman. And somehow, and this is true, and somehow I staved off the conversation about how much I make as a professor. And I waited until I put a ring on her finger. I waited until I.
So are you saying women marry for love, John? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Or women marry for money?
No,
not for love?
No, absolutely not. But she did say, "How are we going to pay for this big family that you keep talking about?" And of course, I looked at her and I said, "I have no idea."
You said, I think there's a line in Scripture about this somewhere.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
So
the
that
Lord provides.
So that's true. That is one of my best.
Birds have the nest in the trees.
So listen, when we talked just before the weekend about preparation for this show, you mentioned Anaheim Angels great. He's one of the few guys in the history of the game to really be outstanding on the mound as a pitcher, and he is a true presence at the plate as a hitter. Shohei Otani, Japanese player, and you mentioned some really neat kind of analogies within the world of sport. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I have, I'm not an Angels fan. I do appreciate they took 2 out of 3 from the quote unquote, potentially best team ever, Los Angeles Dodgers 2021. Shohei Otani is the superstar out of Japan that both pitches and hits, and he pitches like incredible fastball, and he's a great hitter. And there's been a number of podcasts or just articles. If you're paying attention in baseball, it's not hard to catch on to Otani because I think he's such a compelling figure. The Babe Ruth, right? That's what Babe Ruth did as well, pitched and hit.
That's right.
And he had Tommy John surgery, so he was out for a little bit, but he's back. And he was a high-profile player coming in, and the Angels have some of the most high-profile players. With Mike Trout or with Pujols now was I think let go recently. Yep. So it's funny because they just don't weigh in enough on the kind of metric of attention that if they were in New York, I hate saying that, but if they're in New York, it's going to be different.
It is.
But Otani, one of the things I think there's a lot to learn from him, and I teach high school, and so one of his points of connection with his teammates, believe it or not, was video games. So I know a lot of athletes play video games, and I have this resistance to them, although I did play video games as a child. So I kind of use that as a way to kind of introduce my students into learning from him as a bridge, just wanting to know how many of them play video games and that how it can be an instrument for connection because there's a language barrier.
Yeah.
But this year, one of the newer ideas that I heard about in this podcast, ESPN Daily, was that it's actually beneficial for Otani to both hit and pitch, because what happens is, baseball is it's a team sport, obviously, but there's all these individual stats and pieces of the game. And he, by doing both, it helps him both ways. So if he has a bad inning as a pitcher, he literally has to check it because he can contribute as a hitter. And then when he does, brings him back out to the mound, and he's fired up because he's helping his team by, maybe he gave up 2 runs, but maybe in another inning, he actually hit and brought in 3 runners, so to speak. So I thought this is an interesting mentality by having the individual and the team contributions. And his manager, Joe Madden, has allowed him to both hit and pitch, which I think is important.
Yeah.
But I coach an individual sport. I coach golf, and I think a lot of times coaches of individual sports, one of the questions we're always asking is, how do you do that? How do you get kids to kind of consider themselves part of a team? Because I see this in my golfers. They all want to know. They're not competing with one another, but they all, as teammates, but they are in a sense, because they have to defend their position and whatnot. But honestly, if you're a really talented golfer in high school, you really don't need to play high school golf. And, it's like tennis. Some of these greats are in these kind of academies, or they're playing tournaments all the time on their own. So I appreciate that my girls, because my team is very talented, that they do play high school golf. And so they're partnered up with one of their teammates. And I said, I want you to think about that mentality. Okay, you have a bad hole, but maybe you are double bogey, which is 2 over par. But you see that your teammate, shot for birdie. Like, let that take some of the pressure off of you.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's the 5 lowest scores. Collectively, we have to contribute. So, just looking to people who are doing things unconventionally to help, my athletes do things differently. So, I don't know, if that resonated with them, but at any rate, I got to talk to them about Shohei Otani and maybe just give an idea for what their contributions mean.
No, this is good stuff. In fact, one of the things that my goal of this show is to bring sports into the world of people who don't know much about sports. And like just talking about Shohei Otani kind of lets people know what that name is, know exactly why he's popular as he is. He's on the mound as well as he is at the plate and so forth. Because I remember I was talking with the aforementioned Radio Maria, their general manager, and he said to me, I like listening to your show because it brings me up in the world of sport, because he isn't a big sports fan himself. And that's one of the things I hope to bring to our listeners, because I think for the most part, they're Catholics who kind of like sports. And that's one of the things I want to bring to them. So, folks, if you're just joining us here on Faith in Sport, this is where we apply our faith to all aspects of sport. We're talking with blogger and podcaster and teacher Ann Stricherz. She's also the author of Pray and Practice with Purpose. Now, my next question, Ann, is the toughest I can ask any guest, but you are, I think, so sound. You're ready to answer something like this. I want to know, are we better with ethics, character, and morality within the world of sport now than we were, say, 20 or 30 years ago? Now, before you answer, I want to let you, but mainly our listeners, know that there are more websites than ever that dedicate themselves to increasing the morality and ethics within sport. There are more blogs. There are conferences that are offered on this, some in which you've been asked to speak, some of which I've been asked to speak. There are radio shows like this. So I'll just end it the way I started. Are we better at sports now regarding character and morality?
So, John, yes, thanks for the loaded question. And I teach a moral issues class right now. So I teach a lot about, I teach specifically now about virtue ethics.
Okay.
But I do love teaching about sports in that class as well. So, for example, last week I showed a video on AC Green, and he was a basketball player that was committed to being chaste until marriage. And, I talked about Willie Mays' 90th birthday last Friday. So I'm always integrating these sports stories. And I think kids, a good story is a good story, and sports is certainly the vehicle for that. Yeah. So, the question for our lesson that day after I talked to you was not so much is it better, and I did ask them that, but I asked my students the question, is it worth it? Like, is it even worth it to learn virtue ethics? And unanimously, they said, high school students can be pretty skeptical, but they said it is worth it because they spoke from their experience of thinking about specific virtues and really trying to practice them and to make them into habits. So is it worth it? Yes. Are we better? I don't know. And the one thought that I'd kind of been thinking about, John, is, virtue, according to Aristotle, was within the mean. So, right, you don't want to be in excess, but you don't want to be in deficiency. And I think, sometimes we see, like, generosity in excess could be foolish because if you gave away all your money, like, your family wouldn't be supported. So even as we evaluate society, we have to look at and if you don't give anything away, then that's being miserly. But even as we're looking at virtues in society, are we better with these examples? I try to frame it within sort of a mean. And I think that's an important lens for looking at something. But yeah, like parents, I deal with this as an athletic, assistant athletic director. Every coach, every time I speak, they talk about the challenge of parents. And it seems like we all know what the problem is, but people aren't willing to do something. For example, like my child is playing so many club sports, it's taken away from our family. We travel all the time. Like they know that it has an effect on their family. That's in an excess, but people aren't willing to just opt out. I think Robert Barron does a really good job on this, Bishop Barron, about talking about, opting out of the culture. So I don't know that we have enough people that are opting out of these extremes. I hope so, or this extreme behavior, or, I don't know, unvirtuous living. I don't know. But I think we have to keep teaching it and encouraging the practice of it.
That's a great way to end. In fact, one of the reasons I asked you that such a tough question is I want to ensure that you will come on again when I ask you again in a few months, because this is a question, of course, that's almost impossible to answer. But I like it, what you're saying, because we have to keep at it. It's why we go to confession. It's why we keep going to church, because we just want to get better. And I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate all that you have to say in the world of sport. So listen, before we go, we have to mention our mutual friend, Haley DeMaria, and your podcast with her. Tell us a little bit about that before you go.
Yeah, so Haley DeMaria has been also a friend of the program. She's an outstanding public speaker. She's an author. She is a fellow Notre Dame graduate. She was a year ahead of me, and she has a compelling personal story about a bus accident her freshman year that really changed the trajectory of her life. What Though the Odds is her book. And we have become friends because of our shared love of sport and spirituality and just our commitment to our faith. Haley is a convert, and she converted to Catholicism because of the community of faith around her in her life that supported that. So we started a podcast called Faith Fondue. It's available on Apple Podcasts, any sort of platform, and it talks about a mix of different topics. But we try to talk about what's hot and what's. We have a spiritual stew, which is a specific reading or gospel passage for the week that we kind of unpack and reflect on. We record every Sunday. So yesterday was Mother's Day. We talked about that. She's a mom of 2 boys. And we get to share kind of our faith and our love of sport. There's always we've talked about the NFL draft. We talked about this week, I mentioned just moms who are professional athletes. So, for example, Michelle West is a U.S. Women's Open champion. She will be playing in the U.S. Women's Open in June. She's given birth, and Serena Williams. So that was fun, just to include, faith and sport into, a conversation, like kind of over a melting pot, like a fondue pot.
Oh, got it. And again, the name is Faith Fondue.
You got it.
Very good. Ann Stricherz, thank you for your commitment to Catholic education and high school sport and all you do, authoring a book, presentations, and so forth. Come on again when we ask you to be on the Faith and Sports show, okay?
I would love that.
Okay,
Thank you
and
for what you do too, John.
I appreciate that.
Love your show.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Have a good week.
There you
Okay.
go, folks.
Take
Ann
care.
Stricherz, author of Pray and Practice with Purpose, a playbook for the spiritual development of athletes. Folks, before we go, make sure that you check out our website, and for an additional $250 off for any services provided by Carolina Crawl Space Pros. Living here in the Carolinas, we have a high level of humidity, many times high humidity level. The crawl space can cause your beautiful hardwood floors to buckle. Call those guys. Call Jeff Wolf and his guys at Carolina Crawl Space Pros. Listen, before we go, I want to thank Carlos Herrera and Stricherz for joining me on the show today. I'm Dr. John Acquaviva. Please join us next time here on Carolina Catholic Radio and Radio Maria for Faith and Sport. St. Sebastian, pray for us.
You've been listening to Faith and Sport on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network and the Radio Maria Network. We want to thank you for tuning in for this all-new edition of Faith and Sport this week and invite you to tune in again at the same time next week for more Faith and Sport right here. And in the meantime, if you can't get enough Faith and Sport, check out CarolinaCatholicRadio.org for all of our encore presentation times for when Faith and Sport airs on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network, and also find the Faith and Sport archive on the Carolina Catholic Radio website for Faith and Sport on demand.